Good morning, COPA. Good morning, colleagues. My name is Aaron Henry, and today I will be serving as your moderator for our diversity and inclusion panel, our discussion today. I work as the administrative assistant in the great department of English here at the college. And this year I have the awesome task of serving as your second vice president in our COPA organization. Our president is Mrs. Simone Boone. She's unable to have words today. I believe she's a little under the weather, but she is participating in our panel. Today, we decided to host a panel about diversity and inclusion because this month, which is October, highlights Diversity Month all over the world. And we thought it would be important for our group to talk about diversity. And we sat down to come up with a very diverse panel, which includes Dr. Burillo-Hopkins, the president of Southwest College, Dr. Darin Baskin, who is our diversity inclusion fellow for the faculty, Mr. Ravi Brahmbhatt, who is our director of entrepreneurial initiatives, Dean Desmond Lewis, who's the dean of college readiness, Professor Syble Davis, who is an English professor, and our officer, Mrs. Janet May, who will be joining us very shortly. And so we believe that this panel of experts, our colleagues, would be able to share with us in a very healthy conversation about diversity and inclusion. We selected a theme of inclusion, resilience, and service. And I believe the theme is very appropriate because we talk about diversity a lot. And there's another piece to diversity Darin always reminds me. And I believe that particularly in our roles, we have to be resilient as we serve our students and all of the stakeholders here at the college. And so without any further ado, we're just going to go ahead, dive into the conversation. We have some questions that the panelists are going to answer. And just to create the conversation, they may go on a different way, but we have from 11:30 to 12:30, and we're going to have our conversation. So we're going to have each of our panelists just to answer the beginning is what does diversity means to them? What is diversity and what is inclusion and what does it mean to them? We can start with Dr. Burillo-Hopkins.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Aaron, and thank you for the invitation to be part of this panel for a very, very important topic now more than ever. Your question about what's diversity. So when I think about diversity, I think of various things. I think about diversity in gender, in race, in ethnicity, in age, sexuality, language, educational background, and so on. But for us as an institution, I think that the important part of why is it important to talk about diversity and inclusion is as an institution and as an educational institution, we have the responsibility to have a safe environment where we can finally start talking in a safe way about the issues that sometimes are misunderstood because of lack of awareness or education, or because sometimes we may have some unconscious biases or misunderstandings that are part of us without realizing it because of structural racism and other types of issues in our society that exist that we don't even realize are there, or we haven't had the discussion about how these structural racism and other types of issues are part of our society, and we're moving in that society without even realizing that in many instances the way we react to each other are due to that environment. So, and as an institution, we become better when we have a range of ideas. Diversity also helps employees feel more engaged and understood by the institution that they work with. And we as a whole are able to have a better understanding for our students that come to us. So, and it's been proven that diverse groups are also better at solving complex problems and managing risks and spotting opportunities. So, diversity makes us better as an institution. And I'm glad that we are finally at ACC having these discussions. And I commend COPA for taking the lead to having this panel today. So thank you.
Thanks, Dr. Barillo. Ravi?
Thanks, Aaron, and the panelists, as well as COPA, for the opportunity to share. And, really, Dr. Barillo said a lot of things that I also, I piggyback on that. It is variety, and I think it is having different points of views and backgrounds and working together as a diverse group of individuals to solve complex problems, exactly how she said it. And if you think about it, I like eating food, right? I like to think about diversity as like the variety of spices and sweets and the salt and just it's an intentional inclusion of these elements to make a meal, fun. To take something that's blend, if it's just embedded ideas, to now adding different elements, trying different best practices, being open to sort of a more richer, more sensual, more tastier treat, right? So as an institution, I think having more a conversation around diversity means inviting people to the party, and then inclusion would be like asking to, being asked to dance, right? So that's how I look at it. And but it's a great conversation today because now it is a household conversation, something that I'm having with my boys, right? So
Thank you, Ravi. Desmond?
Well, yes, what diversity? Diversity means, again, as everyone was saying a moment ago, it's in a general sense of having a multiplicity of different views and perspectives that begin to culminate into one. And it's not saying that one is better than the other, but allowing for more collaborative types of discussions and work to move forward. And you said, what does it mean to me? Well, it's the way that my life is lived. It's the basic means by which I believe society can move forward. And I believe it's the only way that things can actually exist. Now, I will say this, when things are diverse, that doesn't mean that necessarily people need to agree. You can agree to disagree, but it's that collaboration in which brings forth, I think, the best ideas and the way society moves forward and institution can move forward. And you ask, what is inclusion? Well, inclusion, I will analogize to Thanksgiving in many people's homes. Everyone gets to come and sit down, but the kids are relegated to a small seat at the card table to the side. That's not necessarily being included, because at the big table, they want to sit with everyone else. And if they are elevated up and they're sitting right there on quote unquote Pawpaw's lap, they're just there in a honorific way. But no, that's not inclusion. Inclusion is giving them a seat. Not even giving them a seat, it's their seat, and allowing individuals to interject, be unapologetic about their perspectives, but not combative. So to me, that diverse and inclusive type of practice is the means by which the truth can only evolve. And to me, there's only one truth, and the truth lies in front of all of us. It's just that sometimes we choose to turn a blind eye or volitionally be ignorant to some very difficult conversations and problems.
Thank you. Darin?
So first I want to say, again, to echo what some of my colleagues are saying, Aaron, thank you, and COPA for actually putting this together and getting this conversation out there. There's a lot of conversations being had around diversity, equity, and inclusion, also the sense of belonging. So for you guys to put this together, to be able to have this open forum and this conversation is an amazing feat at our institution. So I want to thank you for that. And to all the panelists, each one of us bring a different skill set and a different foresight to the conversation of diversity and inclusion. So I am happy to be part of this panel of great educators. And so your question is one of those questions where it's an individualized question, but it's also a question that begs to show where we are, not just as an institution, but as a society. Because as we look at defining terms like diversity and inclusion, we definitely have to look back at how we define those terms as an individual before we can put them into words to even have an impact at an organization. So if you're looking at diversity, you're looking at those dimensions that are used in a way to differentiate groups or individuals from others. And so that has always been that very negative derogatory association of diversity. While if you're looking at a term like inclusion, you're looking at the efforts and practices that an individual or a group has and how an organization uses those ideology of different backgrounds, whether it's culturally, socially, or individually, and how those ideas are accepted within an organization. And so, to me, it has always been when you live in a world and in a society where it's being looked at in a certain way and not always having to have the ability to say the things or act a certain way, then you fall into this category of being closed off or blocked in. And so, if you're looking at these terms, the first thing that you have to look at is what it means to you. And so for me, it has a lot to do with how I see everybody else, because I find that I am a very outgoing person. And so I tend to not see color or see sexuality or see gender or see some of these other unconscious biases that Madeline mentioned that we all tend to have. I have made a conscious effort not to engage in those types of unconscious biases. And so, and also going off what Ravi said, equity is being invited into the room while diversity is getting a seat at the table, and then inclusion is sharing your views and being heard. So that's how I would look at it.
Thank you, Darin. Sybil?
First, I'd like to apologize for being late. I'm still learning on how to deal with this. Anyways, I came in on, I didn't get to hear everyone speak, but I did like what Ravi was saying in regards to going to the party, getting invited to the party, being asked to dance. But I'd like to take it a little bit farther, and not just that, but going on another date after the party, or something of that nature, to even get to know each other. We've had fun together, but now let's talk together. So I like that, and get to know each other. Also, I'd like to say that the only way that diversity can work is with inclusion. The only way. One thing that I teach my students, they always say, well, when I came up, they told us that America was a melting pot. I beg to differ the melting pot, simply because when you melt things in a pot, especially if you're making tomato soup or potato soup, it all becomes one color. I like the term gumbo. Gumbo, you can see everything. Everyone is there, everybody's being seen, and everyone is pulling their weight. Every piece of vegetable, meat, or whatever it is you put in that gumbo is being seen and pulling its weight. So I think when we acknowledge everyone, not just to be at the table, but to allow them the comfortability of being able to express themselves without any problems, without any fear. I think that's what diversity and inclusion is all about. And so often we do fear because we feel that we're not good enough, but allow or invite individuals that could be good enough. You don't know if they're good enough or they're not. And if we don't show that extension to them, then they're always in that corner, But if we include always with open arms and friendly smiles, you get them every time. So that's my definition of diversity and inclusion.
Thank you. I'll repeat the question for Janet because she joined a little late. Janet, we were asking the question is, what is diversity? What does it mean to you? What is inclusion? What does it mean to you?
Thanks, Erin, and I apologize for being a little bit late, and thank you again to COPA and all of my panelists. It's so great to see everybody. The virtual coffee break, I was trying to make that transition really quickly back over here. This is a great question, and I love the way everybody has described diversity, because diversity really is different, bringing together different thoughts, different cultures, different ideas as we go through. Inclusion is the part I really want to focus on, just like Syble did, and I love the term with the gumbo. Thank you so much on that instead of melting pot. It's really, when we start talking about inclusion, it's our stories. We all have stories, we all have a very rich history. And it's when we can sit and listen to one another and share those stories and learn from that, it really becomes an inclusive environment. And that is one thing that, as you guys know, I'm a very outgoing person. Darin and I are very high on that extrovert scale as we go through on that end. And it really is sitting down and really learning about an individual, having that conversation. It makes for that rich environment that I can say, hey, maybe I haven't walked in your shoes, and I know you haven't walked in mine, but I hear you. I really listen to that story, and I can learn from it, and then you can learn from mine, and together we can be a great person.
Thank you, Janet. Writer Andy Taylor famously said, "How we spend our days is, of course, how we spend our lives." For many of us, a large portion of our days is spent at work. In fact, the average person will spend 90,000 hours at work over their lifetime. It's safe to say their job can make a huge impact on their quality of life. How can we advance inclusion, resilience, and service in our everyday interactions with each other, Ravi? This question is for you.
Erin, just to make sure, how can we advance inclusion?
Resilience and service in our everyday interactions.
Yeah. So thanks for that question. It's a great question. And the way I think about this is just look back at that human race, right? The greatest invention of the human race, I think, is trust, right? If there was no trust, then no money could ever be exchanged, no bartering, no communication or any type of process would take place. So I think we have to learn to trust one another, to give them the benefit of the doubt. Otherwise, I don't think that we can even engage in this conversation of advancing inclusion, right? So starting with trust, I also think to advance, inclusion, something that Mahatma Gandhi once said, we have to be the change that we want to see in the world. And one of the things that he said that I think is very, very needed today is to learn to forgive. So first, to advance inclusion, you have to learn to trust, right? You have to put away all your biases. You have to, look at someone and understand that, man, that is a person. Each person is basically the accumulation of their culture, their environment, the food they eat, the air that they breathe, right? That's what humans are. And then if we learn to just trust them, and we learn to forgive. If maybe sometimes, if you look at history hasn't. One group of people hasn't been kind to another group of people, and that's facts, right? But we have to learn to forgive in order to have the conversation of building resiliency amongst communities. It's so much often, that conversation doesn't happen as much. And I think the example that Mahatma Gandhi and Martin Luther King has set is the peaceful protest happens because you're forgiving those who hurt you. That's number one. But then number two, you're forgiving yourself and realizing that, I could be wrong. And it's okay that we can now trust one another. So I think to advance inclusion, I would leave those two words: learn to trust and learn to forgive.
Thank you, Ravi. Diversity brings in new ideas and experiences, and people can learn from each other. Bringing in different ideas and perspectives leads to better problem solving. Working in diverse teams opens dialogue and promotes creativity. the value of diversity is true for our cultures as well. What values does diversity of all types bring to an organization, and particularly to our organization? This question is for our Chief HR Officer, Ms. Janet May.
That is a great question. I just want to make sure I have it. So the values of what diversity brings to an organization.
Yes.
Okay, good. You know, I think values are very much that people, when you have a diverse organization with its ideals and you use diverse groups, people feel very comfortable bringing their whole selves to work. And I think that is a huge value as what we look at. And when I say that, some people don't feel comfortable in doing that, even in very open and diverse environments. So I think one of the values that we have in being a diverse and inclusive environment is the fact that there's this belonging. We belong to where we are. We belong to our team. We have a belonging within our organization and with our students and with our community. I think that's the biggest thing that I can say, that if you say one word that wraps it all up, is belonging. And I really think the promotion of diversity with diverse teams, with the inclusion aspect of everything, because you can't have one and not the other. You have to have both. And then you, as an organization, when someone comes in those doors, whether they are a faculty, a staff member, a student, or a community member, there is belonging. I belong here. I have this team. I know this team has my back, no matter what happens as we go through. And I think that's a huge value that we see within an organization with diversity and inclusion.
Okay, thank you. A spotlight has been taken to injustices we thought were righted, and diversity is once again on the agenda. Every industry has miles to climb before they can catch the reality we all thought was true. What are the most critical changes that we must make to face the future effectively? This question is for Professor Davis.
Say that last part, because you kind of went out.
I'm sorry. What are the most critical changes that we must make to face the future effectively?
Teaching. I mean, you have to teach that. I teach it to my students all the time. Yes, I teach English, but in my classes, I teach civil rights. English is the only discipline, I must say, that you can teach anything and teach them how to write and argue. So I take advantage of that wholeheartedly. So I teach civil rights. I mean, we're talking about it right now. And not only that, because HCC is such a diverse institution that has so many nationalities there, not only do I teach civil rights that are here in America, but I bring what I study, what others have come from, where they've come from, to bring it forth with us. And as Ravi says about Gandhi, that's the first thing. That's the first person who we talk about in English 1302. And then we move forward with people that we're not so familiar with. That we've all heard of Martin Luther King. We've heard of all of the revered individuals. But I teach individuals like Bayard Rustin. You know, a lot of individuals are not familiar. They love who he is. They've never heard of him. I teach about Diane Nash, who is a female freedom rider who actually, got everyone started, or who stepped up to Robert Kennedy, who was the AG at that time. I teach a lot of those things, and I think the more that students or individuals know about things, then they do feel comfortable, or they, especially with someone that they can identify with, who they were not able to identify with before, never even heard of. It makes them more comfortable. And as what Janet was saying, it gives them that sense of belonging, that I know this, I never learned this. And it actually makes them research and get more involved in what's going on and seeing what can actually happen in a positive way. So teaching, I think, is what should happen oftentimes. Yeah.
Your work values are the subset of your beliefs and ideas that are related to your occupation or job. These core principles are an important part of who you are. They include things like honesty, service, self-respect, respect for others, peace, and success. This question is for Dean Lewis. When it comes to inclusion, how do you foster an environment where people background, come from different backgrounds, ideas are valued.
Well, I'm glad you asked that. For my division, and this basically is an offshoot of the work that Darin and I have been doing for years, and especially last year. And it goes along with what Syble was saying and what Janet was saying about cultivating the sense of belonging. Well, there are 4 different pillars of which I've instituted within my division by which we will be moving forward. And those 4 pillars have to do with awareness, understanding, commitment, and action. So in those 4 different pillars, there are 4 phases. So this year we're working on awareness, the who and the what. Who and what is going on, across each one of the departments in my area or at the institution. If you're not aware of things taking place, how are you supposed to respond? We can walk around each day and people, and I'll say this to the panelists and to every attendee, back when we were pre-COVID and you walked through the hallway and you saw one another and a person said, "How you doing?" The default answer, "I'm doing fine." And that person could be going through the worst situation and we're lying through our teeth. So that truthfulness of becoming aware, and I'm not saying disarming yourself to a personal degree that you're uncomfortable with, but I'm extremely comfortable with sharing things despite the stoicism that my face shows. But then when you begin to understand it's that second pillar, that as to go back to that idea sense of belonging, you are connected now to others in a way that not braided, but you're dreadlocked. And if anyone knows about a dreadlock, you can't comb that out. You're part of the fabric of that, as many of us are part of the fabric of this institution, which leads to our third pillar or our third phase, which is commitment. You become committed to things in which you feel like you own. Those of us who are parents here know that when we buy our kids things, they don't value them. But let my daughter, who's 17, go out and buy a little cheap cup and let me touch or break that cup. She has a commitment to that because she feels as though she owns it. So then we move on to action, that 4th pillar. Once you have awareness, understanding, and you're committed, at that point, things become more sustainable, but it's a cycle. So to answer your question or to culminate that into just one, hopefully, coherent statement, I try to share that that's the process by which I work through with anyone that's around me so they can actually see that I want to become aware, I listen, I want to understand because I don't pretend like I understand things. I'm not the end all be all. And then what am I committed to as opposed to what you're committed to? Find those points of convergence where we can commit. And then we take action and continue to move things forward and to look at it as a fluid, dynamic situation. So that's how I think that we can cultivate and culminate those various ideas into something that's sustainable, cogent, and a prudent way to move forward at the institution and just society as a whole.
Thank you. This next question is for Dr. Burillo-Hopkins. How can diversity and inclusion be a priority for Christian Community College when we have so many other big issues to deal with, such as tightening budgets, low enrollment, and a host of other issues that we are faced with at the college, as well as many of our sister educational institutions?
Thank you, Aaron. The question is, how can diversity and inclusion be a priority for HCC in light of all the other issues that we're dealing as an institution right now? So I would say now more than ever, diversity and inclusion needs to be a priority. We have to recognize that as an educational institution and the community that we serve, we have a responsibility to run our institution in a manner that everyone feels welcome, that everybody feels that they have a seat at the table. How we prioritize investments to be able to narrow the gap of that we may have as an institution in terms of diversity and inclusion is extremely important. What programs are there parts of the institution that we have not made those investments, that we do need to make those investments to be true to the mission of access and equity that community colleges were originated for, right? The history of community colleges was a history to answer the gap that existed with opportunity, particularly the minority student and minority communities that did not have access to higher education. So as part of our mission as a community college, as part of that DRED law, we must make diversity and inclusion a priority to help guide our decisions to make us whole. And starting with our institution, then everyone can feel welcome. Then everyone can feel that they're as important, and everybody can feel engaged and proud and committed to this institution.
Thank you. And I'll continue the question in another way with Darin. Why now? Why is it so important now that we focus on diversity and inclusion? When some may feel that it is somewhat late, we're somewhat late in the game. Not necessarily HCC, but the conversation about diversity and inclusion.
And that is actually a great feeder question. I will say that a lot of people are at our institution believe that we're talking about this conversation, or we're having this conversation in relation to something that might be going on within the organization, maybe a court case, or even something that has happened in our society, as we're referencing George Floyd incident or the Breonna Taylor incident. And so a lot of people are associating the college's shift towards more conversations on diversity and inclusion centered around those. The conversation centered around diversity and inclusion has been an ongoing conversation at the institution for a few years now. We've had several impromptu groups that have worked in small silos on the impact of diversity and inclusion within our organization. The problem is exactly what I just said. We've had groups that have worked independent and have worked towards working with a certain population at the organization, and it hasn't reached the level to where it can be impactful at the entire district level. And so over the past few years, the college has taken the steps to be more engaged with the conversations of diversity and inclusion. And it has to do with, of course, as we all know, if you've been in education for any period of time, there's always a pendulum switch in education to where things change. And typically you see those changes somewhere between 5 and 8 years, where you see things in education change. And so 10 years ago, the terms diversity, equity, and inclusion, they were used as the exact same term. They were used as the same term. When you said diversity, you meant inclusion. When you said inclusion, you meant equitable. So the higher ed itself has started to differentiate those terms more so, and now it's come to a point to where there is a different definition for diversity. There is a different definition for inclusion, and there is a different definition for equity. And so that has been going on for probably the past 5 years, to where DEI professionals have become more stable and more apparent at higher institutes of higher learning. And then I also want to say that the college itself, we are an extremely large car with a bunch of wheels that roll through us. And so one thing that we have to be able to understand is that until we're able to have these conversations at the highest levels of the organization, it doesn't matter now, then, before, or after, because nothing is going to happen until it happens at the highest organizations of any institution. And for us, the conversations are now being had at the highest levels of the organization, which should bring about a lot of the changes that we know are necessary in order to move these conversations and this movement forward.
Great, thank you, Darin. This question is for Janet May. Some may say that diversity and inclusion can only work as a top-down policy. Can a staff member be involved in the implementation of diversity and inclusion?
That's a great question, because I look at it a little bit differently. I think it is both a top-down and a bottom-up as you're looking at that. We all have a commitment as part of this HCC family, as part of our communities, as part of our students and our faculty and staff, that we have to all walk the walk and talk the talk, so to speak, on that end. So it's not just one person's responsibility. It's just not just at those at the top, but it's also all those at all different levels of the organization and our students. So I think some of the things that can happen is get involved with the different groups that are out there. There is so much going on. Have those conversations with your team members. Have those conversations with your supervisor and say, hey, how can I help contribute to diversity, equity, and inclusion in my department? Can I do, maybe do a group-led session that, helps in regards to understanding one another? We've been doing a lot of that in talent engagement and also with other areas to have those very hard, difficult conversations as we go through. And you have an open space to have that. So again, just like Ravi talked about trust, as we go through, it really does need to happen. So it's not just a top down; it's also bottom up type, so they can meet in the middle, so to speak, as we go through. And I really do think it's having the groups, having committees. When we are looking at projects, bringing everyone to the table. So when we're looking to do something, a lot of times people think that should just be a decision that's made by upper administration. Sometimes we do have to make those decisions, but I will tell you many times it's getting the input in from everyone else. Some of our best ideas that have come through have not come from people in upper administration. It's come from all throughout the organization. And when we can pull everybody together, we do amazing things. So, I will use the pandemic as an example. We could have all just kind of, gone into our shell and not done anything, but that's not what HCC is about. We are all about helping one another. You have a group of individuals, and this is the reason I love this institution and love working at HCC, is that when things come together, no matter what it is, we all come together and we support one another. And that doesn't matter if it is a president of a college, if it's your CHRO, if it's a faculty member, a dean, we all just pull together and say, what is it that you need? What can I do for you? So I know that's kind of a long answer, but what I'm trying to say is that it's all our responsibility.
Thank you. There are so many things that people from different generations, culture backgrounds, and walks of life can learn from one another. Older employees have decades of wisdom and lived experiences. Younger generations have a fresh perspective and a firm grasp on a cutting-edge technology per se. Ravi, this question is for you. How can we bridge the generation gap, as it may pose a significant challenge for implementing diversity and inclusion?
Thanks, Aaron. So the generation gap and how does it pose a significant challenge? The way I think about this is as an organization, we must all have the willingness, right? To have a purpose, shared values, some rules of engagement that says, if you say something to me and I don't like it, we both agree to be civil with one another, right? So that part is what I call community, right? Our sense of community. And that becomes our willingness to engage in the community. The second part of it is the ability, right? You have to now have the ability to have creative aversion or creative resolution or even creative agility, like having skills to do stuff, right? And while it can be a challenge, and I often hear this, we're trying to teach old dog new tricks, and that's it's. I don't think that it's a challenge that can't be managed, right? If the willingness is there and the ability is provided through training, I think that it can be managed. I think about just my own home, right? So I have little kids, I'm in the middle, and then I have my older parents. My parents provide the wisdom where they may not be ready to act, but they have lived through it, they have the experiences, and boy, do those experiences matter when you're trying to move an institution like HCC, right? But then at the same time, you have the challenges of not enough action, right? You have so much wisdom, you have so much planning, and by the time it's a year and a half and you've been still planning, you have acted on the plan. So there has to be a balance between that wisdom and that inspiration for action to get things done, and we'll figure it out. We'll build a plane on the way there, and We'll figure it out when we get there. So I think there is a gap, sure. I think if you look at in America today, you do have 5 generations of people in the workforce. Think about that, right? 5 generations, everyone from the Gen Zs to the boomers, right? You've got all of them all working together. But I think if you look at the human body, you need the mind, you need the hands, you need the heart, right? Everyone has to play a part together. As long as there is the ability and the willingness to do that, I think this challenge can be managed. And I think training plays a big role, and trust, again, plays a big role, and giving, and if someone young makes a decision or intends to help out an older person, the older person should not have their walls up. They should be open to learning. I learn a lot from students, to be frank. Students younger than me, students older than me who have experience. I learn from them. I think we have to have our walls down a little bit and be open to it, and then vice versa. The young ones, sometimes you got to learn to shut up, which I'm going to do now, because your passion and energy could also be overwhelming, and that energy could also be, misread. So I think that's how I would go about it, Aaron.
Thank you. That was really insightful for me. This question is for you, Desmond. What is an appropriate or good way of combating misconceptions and communicate more effectively?
Well, I'll say becoming comfortable with being uncomfortable. If you are able to have those discussions, I think a lot of time when individuals, not necessarily just here at HCC, but in professionals, they confuse the idea of working together and liking things or liking each other. It's okay to disagree. Many times we don't know people to that degree to like or dislike. So when people internalize things or personalize things, it becomes a barrier for any type of cohesive communication and collaboration to happen afterwards. But if you become more comfortable with the ideas that the purpose for me to be in whatever space, whether it's a workspace or some other space where you're collaborating, is much larger than yourself, it's easier to have those type of conversations and move things forward in regard to those conceptions. As Ravi was talking, one thing went through my mind. Many a times when we speak, we're looking for biased confirmations. Say, for instance, and again, I'm not trying to pick on Ravi, but I'm just saying, say, for instance, Ravi resembled someone who I had a bad experience in the past with. As soon as I'm looking at Ravi, I'm not listening to Ravi. I'm not thinking about Ravi. I'm thinking about whomever that person was with that bad experience. And as soon as something comes out of his mouth or that individual's mouth, whom of which is speaking to me, then I have transferred all of those negative attributes into that person. So therefore, communication is gone. So for me to combat that misconception and poor communication, first of all, I try to listen way more than I talk with most people. And in fact, those of you who know me, until you get to know me a little better, most of the time I say much of nothing. In fact, Darin and I were joking and laughing about that the other day with a group that for years I would just sit and listen because I don't want anyone I don't personalize things in ways that others may. And I'm good at compartmentalizing and taking my time and understanding what's taking place. So I think a way of combating that again is to work on becoming comfortable with being uncomfortable at times. Now, I'm not talking about a perpetual state of discomfort, but one in which you're able to work through challenging and what some may term as difficult conversations from time to time.
Thank you. In recent months, demonstrations against police brutality have brought much needed attention to the unfair, unwarranted, and heartbreaking loss of life and injuries to people of color at the hands of police. The opportunity to come together to address systematic racism has perhaps never been so great or so top of mind. This question is for Professor Davis. Do we have a responsibility to identify and combat structural racism?
Start that again. I just got the last part. I want to make sure I cover everything on that.
Do we have a responsibility to identify and combat structural racism?
Yes, I believe we do. Simply because, like I said earlier, in my classes, we do study civil rights, and with all of this going on, as you see the difference of these students that we're teaching, well, that I'm teaching, they are, a lot of them are young, and they see the difference of what was going on back, what they've read, where it was only one group of individuals protesting, and now they see many different people protesting. And I just think that it's right. They just want to know where they stand in regards to being able to say what they want to say, to do what they want to do, to get to what they want to do it, and to do it in the most positive way. So yes, I think it is our responsibility. Yes.
Okay. Dr. Burillo, this question is for you. What are some ways we should work collectively to ensure our environment is equitable and actively anti-oppressive? She may be muted.
Yes, I was unmuted myself. Thank you. Thank you
No, I
so
got you.
much. So I believe that to move, well, let me start by saying that here's the thing. Instead of trying to change some people to fit the organization, we must focus on transforming our organization to fit all people. And to move towards racial equality, our organizational culture has to prioritize humanity. People, everybody has a story. I always tell this: every one of us has a story, and one of the best ways in which we can continue to work together is for us to be open and ask the question of each other. Tell me your story. I want to hear your story. I want to hear from your perspective, right? Because when I hear your story, I'm going to become aware of things that I have never experienced, and I'm going to be able to understand you better. But I have to be willing first to prioritize my humanity and your humanity, and to have an open heart, and to be truly open to hear your perspective. Um, I have many times when I'm working with some of the staff or here at home, and we have a different way of perceiving a situation. I always say, think about this. If we're in the same room, we are in the same room, but if I were to ask you to describe that room, we each are going to have a whole different perspective of that room, which is based on where I'm sitting. I'm going to be able to describe what I see. Unless you tell me what you're seeing and I'm willing to turn around and be able to see it from your perspective, I want to understand that I don't have the complete perspective of that, neither do you. But if we're willing to talk and share our stories, now we're going to be able to understand our entire culture and the things that are helpful for us to work together and have an environment that is equitable and is anti-oppressive. I believe that was part of your question. So we have to be able to see the norms, the values, and the practices in our institutions and in our environment that sometimes may be structural in place to give advantage to some groups more than others. And if we're able and willing to see that, then we're able to work towards a better inclusion and an equitable environment for all.
Thank you, Dr. Burillo. This question is for you, Darin. Should we mask down or downplay any aspect of our physical, cultural, spiritual, or emotional self at work?
So that is a great question. And actually, it's part of the premise behind what diversity is. And if you're asking me, and as an African American male, I would say you should not. Simply being that we are an acceptable society, or we're on out to be an acceptable society in which we are supposed to be able to accept each individual for who they are. Then you also have to realize that even within the larger concept of the country we live in, the society we are drawn to, the city we stay in, and then as going all the way down to the micro level of the office that you work in at the college that you're working at, there could be times where someone might feel like they have to temper down who they are or what they are. Even in our, I've heard stories at Houston Community College where employees have been told that they shouldn't wear their hair that way. That's not representative of what a employee at a Institute of Higher Learning should sound like, or what they should wear. And so most everybody knows me, so I am a doer more so than anything else. So I'm going to do what I have to do in order to be who I am. For some people, that's a little bit harder to do. I would say that there are policies that are in favor of you being who you are, where no one can discriminate against you for who you are or what you believe in. There are policies in place that support you in your choices. You also have to consider that we are in a city that is the most diverse city in the United States. And so for us to have the student population that we have at the organization, and for us to be in the most diverse city in the US, and for us not to have that of understanding begs to differ to the individual and not to the person who's trying to express themselves.
Okay, thank you. And if any of the attendees have any questions for the panelists, please go ahead and put it in the chat. We're going to wrap up at about 12:30. I'm going to ask two of the questions. And if I see any questions, then I'll ask those questions that you may have individually for our panelists. This question I'm going to ask you, Ravi. How can we recognize and overcome unconscious bias?
How can we overcome unconscious bias? I mean, so all of us are an accumulation of our uprising and our culture and the environment, right? So I think it's important to, like Dr. Burillo said, everyone has a story. I think you have to be willing. I think it's important to realize that the other person is a human, has a story. There is a background and a wealth of knowledge and a wealth of information that this individual also brings. So, one, it starts within you to first learn to forgive and break that barrier internally. I think it's so, instead of asking others to change, I think we have to learn to change ourselves so that if we're aware of the biases that we live up to, then we need to break that down. And then I think as a community, as a society, if you think of the level of inclusions, I think about, as a community, we need to do this. There has to be a connection amongst one another. Once those barriers are broken down, it creates that connection. Once that we are connected, we can contribute. Once we contribute, we can complement, and then we are comprehensively together. So I think that's how, as an institution, individuals have to learn to stop that bias when it happens. Sometimes people think they're being helpful. I'm a big advocate of being kind, being helpful, but I have to realize when my helpfulness may be embarrassing an older individual who I'm trying to technology. Let me help you because I see you're juggling with tech. I want to be helpful. That's my nature. That's how my mom raised me up. I say, hey, you see someone, even if it's someone in your team and they're struggling or they made a mistake, then we quickly need to, try to help, right? But then to the other person, they may say, hey, you know what? No, I don't need help. And that's, at that time, who's wrong? I don't think anyone's wrong. I think we need to be intentional in that process. if we focus on what we can do, at least you can go to sleep at night better. If you're the one who, if someone said you were biased and now it's proven, then you'll lose sleep over it. If your parents and family found out that you were doing this, then in a community, you're kind of, barred it out. You don't want to be that person. So the best thing is work on yourself to break those biases down by trusting and caring. I think Dr. Burillo said about humanity. I'll add one more. I think you need to build empathy. Empathy of the of the human race, right? That we do care and we do have to be passionate about the work we do, but we also have to be intentional about helping and being kind to our colleagues. And I think that would help. It's not the solution to end all, but I think it's certainly halfway there.
Okay, thank you, Ravi. And thank you to each of our panelists. I don't see any questions, but I do see a comment that, and I believe I have her name. I hope I'm not messing up her name. I think it's Yaneli. She said, "Thank you all so much for having this engaging talk. It's nice to hear these inspirational workshops during these times, especially during these times. My mom is Mexican and my dad is Pakistani. I am a firstborn and starting college was intimidating, but HCC has helped me realize potentials I didn't know were there before. So thank you, HCC professors and staff. Thank you for sharing your story. We are all here to help one another, and your experience help all of us at HCC. If any of the panelists would have last words, we can begin with Professor Davis and each of you, and we'll be able to conclude at 12:30. So, Syble, go ahead and your final words.
I really appreciate you including me in this, Aaron. I think Nelly is my student. But anyway, I thank you all. I appreciate everything that you all were saying, and I really, really hope that we can do this more. I wish it could be like a monthly thing, and that way, since we're not seeing each other, and that way we can get to know each other, and not just get to know each other, but get to know what we're doing to make HCC more cohesive. Again, I thank you, and I really appreciate everything that everyone has said, and I hope you all liked what I said as well. All right.
Thank you. Ravi, if you're still here, because I know you have to leave at 12:30 exactly.
He's not here.
Okay. Darin?
Again, I would just like to say this was a great opportunity and a great conversation, and I'm glad that COPA is actually stepping up and stepping forward to be part of the conversation and allowing for the conversations to take place. Because even going back to one of the questions you asked about what can staff members do something for the inclusion of diversity and inclusion, the answer is yes. It's this diversity is everybody's role, not anybody's, but everybody's. So thank you for having this conversation. And I want to thank all of the panelists. And I also want to say it's great seeing everybody. You all look great. I can't see all the participants, but I'm pretty sure y'all look great too. So.
Dr. Burillo?
Thank you, Aaron. Thank you for having me be part of this panel discussion today. I am very proud. I'm very proud of HCC. I'm very proud of COPA for taking the initiative. It's an example that you can lead from where you're at, and I'm just very grateful to all of you for doing this. And I agree that we probably should do this every month in different venues or different ways. But thank you for leading. Thank you for starting this dialogue. And I'm proud of HCC and just part of being part of this family. Muchas gracias.
Thank you. Desmond?
Thank you all again for having me. And I'll just say, and it's not my quote, but change the conversation, change who's in the conversation, and you'll change everything. And if nothing changes, then nothing changes. So just know that you do have the collective power and individual voices to do so.
Thank you. And then finally, our Chief HR Officer, Mrs. Janet May.
Thank you so much. And I want to say again, thank you to COPA for allowing me to be part of this panel, and to all the panelists Thank you guys so much for sharing anything. You know, one thing I want to challenge everybody is we've talked about sharing and inclusion and things of that nature. Reach out today, share your story with somebody. Really talk about those stories because those are what make us who we are. Many people don't know each other's stories, so just take time out, reach out to a coworker, have a casual conversation, and really share what you're feeling that day. Share what your story is so that everyone understands one another. And it's only through us doing that we'll continue to be the dynamic organization that we are.
Thank you. And it is exactly 12:30 and we are finished. Hope everybody have a good day. See you soon. Be safe. Mask up. Bye-bye.